universities around norms on alcohol drinking, and that was it. And then in the field, in sub-Saharan countries, what you see, there was a lot of work being done on social norms around child marriage, and that was it. What we know is that behaviors are sustained by, and those of you who work with the ecological framework will know that behavior is sustained across, by factors across different levels of human interactions. So here we have 4: individual, social, material, and structure. The ecological framework, however, has a limitation when it comes to social norms. And the limitation is that it doesn't talk to practitioners about the importance of knowledge and interactions, overlappings between domains. So say that you want to increase access to sexual and reproductive health services, and you have a great partnership with the government, and they establish a fantastic, they improve the material conditions, they establish the number of hospitals in a given country. But if you don't look at the interaction of the presence of the service with what comes from the social, it might be the norms, then you might not realize that there is a strong stigma associated to having fistula. And so women won't access the service because they don't want other women to know they have fistula, because they will be isolated, they won't be allowed to touch food, so on and so forth. In the same way, you might lobby a government to pass a policy or a law against domestic violence, but the police won't just implement it because they believe that that's the role of a woman. A woman needs to tolerate violence. So something that we kind of argue is that this is where social norms operate. So essentially they exert influence across this overlapping, which is where the cracks and the opportunities for generate change lie. And in the middle we put power, because of what I was saying before, the idea that power is strongly, that norms embody the power relations, and they continue to reproduce them over time. Okay. So I mentioned that, so if we are looking at this flower that I just showed to you, and that's actually a tool for diagnosis for an intervention. So you realize you're working on something here, and that you need to partner with people working here. So you might have social norms that, as I was mentioning before, have a weaker influence, right? So you say, well, I don't need to work on norms, I will work on laws, policies, knowledge, and aspirations. But what you may find yourself in is a situation in which you are kind of using all the ladders, if you want to think in terms of chutes and ladders, but you really you don't see any change coming through, right? So this is rather, here what I'm doing is a call for integrating social norms work into your current work, which doesn't mean focus on the one, that doesn't mean consider that they have an negligible influence either. And there's this little nice animation about change coming through only when you turn it. It took me a good day. So the last couple of minutes, so Patty, who's going to speak as well after me, has said, I'd really like for you to present the Tolstoy model. So some of you have heard about it. Sadly, Tolstoy is, I was director of research for Tolstoy for 3 years. Sadly, I think, Tolstoy is mostly known for the fact that they work on female genital cutting. This is really, and I say sadly, because it reduces the understanding of how you work on social norms. They don't work on FGC as a separate issue at all. This is a 3-year program that engages people in 3 weekly conversations. That's a conversation 3 times a week. And they engages men and women together, and they speak about human rights, health, but one of the most critical components is the visioning and the deliberation about the values that people share. And when it comes to social norms, very often norms are considered a public good, because some norms help solve social dilemma. We need to get our daughters married. We need to decide which side of the road we want to drive, so on and so forth. So we protect the norm because it's a social technology. Okay, that allows us to get somewhere. It's a social technology that is involved in the practice, but it really reflects a value. So the value might be, I respect my neighbors, I am a religious person, I love my children. So trying to change, creating a space where the practice can be changed means helping people recognize the difference between the value and the practice. Otherwise, if that difference is not spelled out, people might feel that the value is threatened, and not the practice that they are currently, into which they're currently grounding, onto which they're currently grounding existing values. So this is part of what happens in these classes. And as the discussion on values and practices happens, and they see incoherence, motivation change emerges. We're talking months of work here. And that comes with knowledge and skills that people will need to operate this, to translate this motivation into action, including public speaking skills, project management, skills for collective action and democratic discussions. So this leads to the deliberation. So we are not embodying our values in the best way. In which way can we do that? And on the one hand, what you have is individual changes, right? But that's not enough for collective changes. For collective changes, what you need is for this group of 25 people to expand. So you need this motivation to become the driver through the skills of what are we going to do to change. Well, we need others. And the way in which they can pull others in is by using their own language, their own rationale, their own explanation of why it is good or not to change a given practice, which leads them to, through public action and commitments, to collective changes. My last slide. Oh yeah, and you have new beliefs and norms popping all around. So this is a 3-year process. Some processes are faster. My last slide, I guess. Oh well, no, my second last slide. Something that I really care that you listen to today is that you can get there should be things popping up until here. Too much. So this is what we call the funnel of social norms, and it's a way in which we systematize our tools for diagnosing and measuring social norms. Very often NGOs tell me, well, here's my questionnaire. Can you help me create measures for social norms? And there seems to be a belief that norms can be tackled in the same way. Doesn't matter what the norm is, doesn't matter where you are in the world, doesn't matter who you're working with, doesn't matter who you are, right? Well, things actually matter. So we have created, in that report you will find tools that you can use according to the place in which you are on this framework. But before you go to measurement, you have strong qualitative discussion about how you disaggregate the data. Last slide for real. Something that made me thinking, this is an article that the authors created this fake data. But there is this idea, so the word behavior is a terrible word, right? Behavior doesn't mean anything. Action means, because the word behavior seems to suggest that we're always static, right? Which is the camera on? Oh, okay, which is not true. Because in each situation, like this one, we are under a lot of social presses and internal motivation to act in one way or the other. We never act in the same way twice. As practitioners, you may want to change what people do, and you might, at the end of your intervention, you might achieve to, but you must be ready to having lapses. And if your evaluation is here, you might just have bad luck. So the question is, how do you sustain, how do you keep it up? And so this is achieved by keeping up of the new norm. So this is a lot and very introductory, but there will be hopefully space to talk, but you can also reach out to me if there is something that you want to understand a little bit better. Thank you.
That was brilliant, and I'm sure it has raised up a lot of aha moments for people, and maybe people have questions, but I'd ask you to hold those because we have a few more presentations coming. So before I joined Oxfam, I was lucky enough to be on a large global study called Generate, and I'm so pleased that my previous colleagues have come to talk about their getting. We have a lot to talk about, and hopefully there will be enough time. So I think Lone just going to go first.
Thank you very much. So I will introduce what Generate is about, and Patty will take over and give you a taste of the findings. We are right now in the initial analysis phase. Yes. So I first wanted to say, who are we? I'm from CIMIT. CIMIT is the International Nation Wheat Improvement Center. And this is just to give you an idea where is CIMIC in the world. It's an international center for research for agricultural research for development. And if you check the next one, yes. CIMIC is part of what is known as the CGIAR, Consultative Group for International Agricultural Research. All not-for-profit, non-profit research for agricultural research for development. So you may know some of the different entities, CIAT, SIP, International Potato Center, IFRI, the Food Policy and Research Center, International Center for Institute for Tropical Agriculture, IWRI, etc. So there's a whole group of these centers, similar to CIMIC, working in different parts of the world. Yeah? So, it's very complicated, as these systems are. We work together on different things as well, and those are called CRPs, CGIAR research programs, when we start doing things both with, among ourselves and with lots of other partners. And CIMIC leads the maize agri-food systems and the wheat agri-food systems, CRPs. So those, and then we've got lots of the other institutes I just mentioned work on some of the others here. Everybody with lots of external partners. And that takes me then to Generate. Yes. So, and I should social scientists, gender researchers in these different entities. And we are not many in each of these centers or so. So this came out of really a bottom-up thing about lots of talk about we need something about this kind of thing and we need to make this, take this into the research. A little bit like what Ben was saying, like, hey, we need to factor these parts into it. And little by little we managed to get going on some of these things here. So Generate actually involves gender researchers from 11 of these CRPs.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you can go to that. Just setting, what are we looking at in Generate? We are trying to say to our constituencies, which are mainly agricultural researchers, we're suggesting to look at agriculture in a different way than they normally do. Not focusing so much on the plant or the plot or the agroecological things, but really looking at agriculture as a social practice and in a context, in a social context. In order, of course, to sort of bring this in that the social context matters. And it matters for what people can do and who can do what, or how easy or how difficult is it for people. And the message that we try and bring to people, to our constituents, is that this has implications. In the initiative, focuses on the intersection of and agricultural innovation. And we're trying here to speak the biophysical speak as well. You know, they have these things type by environment, by management. So we're trying to say genomes by agency, by agricultural innovation. So parts of going into the way of speaking as well. Support for collaboration, as I said. And what's interesting here for us, many of us in this initiative, we are really qualitative researchers. So a mix of different backgrounds. But part of what we also try to do is to make research visible and in this agricultural research scale, qualitative, yeah. In total, Generate includes 137 community case studies in 26 countries. So that's, field teams have gone to 137 villages, communities across the world and applied the methodology. A couple of words around the concepts first and how we use them. And I should say here, thank you very much to your own very own Duncan green, because we are actually borrowing his, some illustrations from him in this slide and the following one. We look at gender norms, and we look at gender norms as the socially constituted rules or expectations that prescribe men's and women's everyday behavior. We're looking at them as, well, very much, you can see these parts here, but the iceberg, which has really become a favorite illustration of ours, thanks to Duncan, is that one about, it is mainly in the hidden and it exerts great force. So it's that big, very forceful thing, but difficult to get at, difficult to see. Yeah, rigid in some contexts, flexible, changes over time, and something, when it comes to what we're really interested in, that interlinkage between gender norms, agency, and agricultural innovation, we are seeing that this is not a level playing field. Next. So how do we look at agency? We understand agency as a capacity to make strategic life choices and act upon them. And we look at agency as something that's really crucial for people to be able to do new things in the things they go about doing in their lives. Agriculture is often small communities, lots of tradition, lots of established ideas about what's the proper way of doing things. So when you try and do something new, you often need reaction. Oh, nice. But we believe, and we find in our data, that this agency is highly gendered for people's ability to do new things. How do we look at the innovation? Again, we look at innovation as a social process, a social construct that often has multiple actors involved, and those multiple actors often have different interests. And they often have different capacities to actually mobilize resources and leverage yeah, we can move to the next one. So the generate methodology, as said before, the field team have gone to 137 communities. A lot of time, a lot of effort on developing the methodology, because the idea here was, we, as qualitative researchers, recognize we're looking at something which we believe is very context-specific. Yet, we want to try and do something across many contexts, because the constituencies that we would like to influence, they mainly want to see things that give them, as they usually say, big bang for the buck. Something they can give us a couple of ways of fixing it and we can roll it out. It's not that we think we can do that, but we want to try and see, okay, can we, to what extent can we show qualitative research in many places and then, yes, come up with something that shows that there are patterns here. They might not be the same, they might not act out the same way in the same places, but. So we spent a lot of time on the methodology, and it's the same methodology applied in the same way in every single community. And that sounds like something that's difficult too, and it is. But we had to calibrate. So we had to pilot in different contexts, very different contexts, and come up with something that worked in most places. And then there are some, you'd say, well, we would say contextualize it. For example, one thing basic is everything takes place in local language. So, yeah, and local concepts, key concepts gets adjusted to move. Anyway, it's a mixed bag of, or mixed package of semi-structured informant interviews and single-sex focus group discussions with different age groups and socioeconomic groups. And then key informant interviews focus in on, for example, individual people's innovation trajectories. So men and women who are known in communities for being innovators or doing new things, always tinkering with things in agriculture, the way they do ag. And then going back into their experiences and how those spaghetti out. Not as a linear process, generally it becomes really a spaghetti. Yeah, next one. Case study selection was guided by a 2x2 matrix, where on one dimension we have wide, what you would probably not low and high, wide gender gaps and narrow gender gaps. And on the other dimension, context with what we coined in as economic dynamism. And I should say that this includes also agroecological endowment or potential things like infrastructure, access to infrastructure, markets, etc., that kind of thing. So, and within this matrix then, the key thing is guided by the principle of maximum diversity sampling. So the idea is to get samples that sort of spread out in a most diverse way across the different quadrants. Yeah. And finally, I mentioned that for us there's a methodological innovation here or interest here of trying to take the contributions that we should bring forth and show in this specific context that we work in, how qualitative research methodologies can really contribute. And normally, so this is a slide we developed to explain to our colleagues from other disciplines how we sort of try and fit in here. We can discuss at length where exactly the individual bubbles fall, but mainly it's to show how Generate, for example, is different from the, you could say, more concentrated, smaller sample, but much, say in some ways, larger investment of typical ethnographic approaches, versus, on the other hand, large quantitative approaches, which have less potential for actively really looking at the context and taking that into account as well. Yes. And then I think I'll stop here as an introduction about Generate and hand over to Patty. There's a little bit of all the different entities that are part of it and some of our colleagues here. Patty?
Well, going back to the iceberg.
Yes.
Much as I love Duncan Green, he's been a brilliant champion of it. I think it actually comes from a rumour around work with Daniel Wood, is that right? So just
very good point.
So wonderful job. But it's great he's been able to champion it. It's
Yes.
fast, but,
Thank you very much for that one.
So it's a great privilege for me to get to present to you, working in the field. And my talk, you would rather I'm on that stage, just so people can see. My talk today really is trying to present findings which I think will be very strategic for a crowd that's interested in changing mindsets and working in the field. So that's where I've concentrated today. And if you can manage interactions between agency and norms, I think it's incredibly strategic for thinking about processes of gender transformative change and what they look like on the ground, how they unfold. So my talk today is in 3 parts, but it's really focused on 3 community typologies. I'm going to be giving you a filter to think with about regularities and how agency and norms play out, interact, manifest on the ground. So what we can see across the 137 cases, these cases are selected, not all of them, but many of them are in areas of the world where there is a lot of agricultural research going on. They have more access maybe than if you did a random sample to the latest technologies, or they've been introduced to them. And we can see in these communities poverty reduction, and when we measure empowerment, people overall are reporting empowerment. But this is uncovering, or this is hiding a tremendous amount of heterogeneity, and it's heterogeneity between the communities and also within the communities. Genevieve went to we conducted 6 focus groups and 8 interviews and key informant interviews in every single village. 2 focus groups with the middle class, 1 male, 1 female, 2 focus groups with poor, 1 male, 1 female, and 2 with youth, male and female. But despite really pronounced differences in social life, what Genevieve helps you see are important patterns. And to give a taste of this on a topic which is a norm, I believe, attitudes, behaviors, beliefs, What is typical and appropriate for a woman in my village to move about in the public spaces? And we asked this to both young men and young women's focus groups. And we asked them to assign a number between, out of every 10 women in your village, how many can move freely on their own in the public spaces? And I didn't want the first person, and this is a trick for diagnosing norms, to influence what everybody else in the focus group said. So they had little stickies, and they had to write a number between 1 and 10. And we selected them, and we trained the facilitators to group them together by the counts and discuss with the group, well, 5 of you thought 5 women could move freely, but 4 of you thought only 2 women. Why? Why 5? Why 2? But in Uganda, patterns are pretty low. 5 or fewer, except for the men in this one village of Uganda. The green are the men, the orange are the women. In India, there's tremendous heterogeneity. So obviously, and this is Gender 101 for Oxfam probably, what you're going to be able to do in this India 2 village is going to be profoundly different from what you can do in this India 11 village, where both men and women say it's typical and appropriate for most every woman here to go out and be part of the public life and the public space of the community. This particular norm we're finding very useful to understand wider norms. It seems to be a good bellwether. Okay. So I want to bring you to a village that's in the Rift Valley of Ethiopia. I'm starting on the typologies here. This village is sandy. Conditions are difficult. Gender norms highly restricted. Women don't sell in the marketplace, except for very few. And they endure a lot of stigma, the widows who have to sell and work and provide for themselves and their families. And over the past 5 years, we asked in all focus groups independently, what are the new agricultural practices and ways of organizing that have been introduced into your village? And by the 4 Women's Focus Group, quite a few. They have a lot of interventions in this village. And in most of the villages, we saw this. A lot of opportunities coming in. And then we asked, well, which on this list are the 2 most important to the men of the village? And the 4 Women's Focus Groups had intercropping with maize, and they do it with beans. And the men are also growing and selling vegetables. And for women, it was milk production, and they also improved varieties of maize greatly from their maize crop. The 4 Women's Focus Group is the only focus group to mention improved maize for women. And I would say that in a lot of communities, women are not associating benefits for themselves and their families with improved technologies. We have many communities where they are as well. But in communities where norms are more restricted, we often find the new technologies much more associated with men and the new practices. So if we move on, the women tell us that, well, the improved maize is important to us because it's made our households more food secure. And then if you probe deeper into the material, what you get, you can move on, a story from these women that the new planting practices with the intercropping is requiring them to provide labor in the fields. It's more labor and time intensive, but the productivity goes way up. Men, however, are finding over time that the production is not, in this particular village, they're struggling with the quality of the seeds, and they've been frustrated with their maize crops. But they're still growing them, but they're letting the women do more and more work. And the women are resenting this. The poor women are saying men are becoming lazy. But I don't ever want to leave you with just the perspective of the women. Gen Beta is half with men. The men on the whole, their discourse is very, very positive about the use of these technologies, and they say it's changed their life, dramatically improved the well-being of their village. We conduct ladder exercises in all 6 focus groups, and they're all slightly different. But in the Poor Women's focus group, they register poverty reduction of almost none. That our village has gone from 75% poor to 70% poor. It's a quite elaborate exercise. The Poor Men say that it's fallen 20%. It's gone from 15% to 40%. With the middle class focus group, we do a ladder of power and freedom, looking at questions of agency and empowerment. And the women report no movement up their ladder of power and freedom. The men, almost a full step climb. So you have a very different perspective. Men say, we're getting better here. Women say, not so much. Okay. And I'm not going to go into it, but I have given you, if you want to go back and look at my presentation, key elements about the 2 ladders. And if there's questions on this, I'm happy to discuss it. It's a whole presentation in itself, the ladder instruments. You can switch. 1 is the tipping point cases. 2 I call climbing cases. And 3 are the churning cases. And this Rift Valley case from Ethiopia is a churning case. They are contexts where one social group or another that we sampled is speaking of difficulties. And these difficulties are very contextual. It can be rising poverty, it can be lots of jobs due to mechanization. It can be women feeling that their lives are not getting any better. They cannot access opportunities. And if you go into the report, there's a couple other qualities, these churning cases. And what I always see in these cases are norms that are contested. Women are disagreeing among themselves about how relaxed norms are or how they're changing, if at all. Men are pushing back. They may feel insecure about their authority position. Norms are more rigid. There's less normative change in cases. So I already described the churning cases, key dimensions about them. But what's, for me, the biggest takeaway is overall the normative climate is discouraging women from exercising agency. That's a quality I see across churning cases. Okay. So now we're going to swing to the other side. We're going to go to the tipping points. And what I did these ladders, all 6 ladders in the are showing really great news. Or our poverty is falling, or men poverty is falling by men say we're climbing up our ladder at least a step of power and freedom, and women are climbing up by at least a step, and the youth are putting themselves at least at step 3. I can talk more about youth, but they often feel hindered. And so step 3 is pretty good for a young person. So with these tipping point contexts, it's the normative environment. Again, if you look at the normative environment, it's enabling women to contribute to the well-being of their household, to contribute to the well-being of their communities. And I don't have time to give you the flavor of the tipping point. I'm hoping I whet your appetite to ask reports, one with the maize data and one with the wheat data. And this is 27 maize cases. And just to give you a sense of how the tipping points stand out, 5 tipping point cases, 2 Mexico, 1 Nigeria, 1 Tanzania, and 1 Nepal in the sample. Women on average observe 50% poverty reduction, compared to just 14% in the 22 other cases that are not tipping points. These are a combination of the cases. And almost 2 steps on their ladder of power and freedom. And then, let me get this right. Is this the men? The men are climbing up as well. Where are they? Where are the women? Not as much of a difference, but the women are really feeling empowered by the context and things to change. If you look, just to give you some examples of education, of normative change, women report greater physical mobility in the tipping point. It's more common, and this is across both the maize and the wheat data sets. So for young women, it's typical, and it's more typical, more appropriate for them to work for pay in the tipping point. There's a larger share of women working as agricultural laborers, and women in many contexts appreciate those opportunities. And there's a greater presence of active producer groups in these contexts. So by learning to work with the concepts of both agency and norms and how they're manifesting on the ground, it gives you a window into social processes that shape both the opportunities and the risks facing men and women and different kinds of men and women within the communities. I find it incredibly useful. This is my fourth global study. This is the first time I've had bottom-up data on poverty and each other. And I would love to have for women's measurements on the power and freedom ladder, but you can't do more than one ladder with one focus group. So the middle class did power and freedom, and four did poverty trends. And I just want to thank I may be as big as Dan. I believe that context matters crucially if you're working on norms, but so do both men's and women's agency. If you only have a handle on women, you've only got half the story here, because men are key gatekeepers. And what I'm finding over and over and over again in all my studies is where men are finding opportunities that are desirable for them, and again, it's highly gendered, it's easier for women to avail of opportunities as well. And we can't lose sight of that. So you cannot assume that they'll move together, norms and agency, because they just simply don't. We can see that. My next slide. The analysis strategy in a nutshell is a mix of what I call getting to know how norms and agency and innovation processes are unfolding in specific contexts and for specific social groups within that context. It's telling the story of the village. And then we have variable-oriented analysis where we're looking at things like physical mobility across the cases and unearthing patterns. How does it relate to the economic dynamism principle? Okay. And this is a slide I could spend a whole presentation on, but I'll just give you one measure, one takeaway. It's decoded data about the responses to why men put themselves on step 3 now and step 3 10 years ago and step 4 now. Each man in their focus group rated the power and freedom of the majority of the men in their village now and the majority of the men in the village 10 years ago. And then there's a big discussion about the trends they observed. Men don't like to talk about low agency or only moderate agency. Overall, they rated themselves halfway between step 3 and 4, but they only talk about being on steps 4 and 5. It's norm breaking for a man to feel disempowered. It's really anxiety provoking to ask them to talk about why they put themselves on steps 2 or 3. They don't. They talk about being on steps 4 and 5. Women also had more to say. They on average put themselves around step 3, but it's not to the same extent. And I did some combination notes. And for men, Their livelihood roles really dominate their sense of agency. But they also talk about their roles as authority figures in their households. Men almost never talk about their lives as part of their agency until they feel empowered. For women, it's much more of a balancing act across their different roles. And I'm going to wrap up. So, I think systems thinking really guided my work in trying to unearth typologies to help others get have a useful filter for thinking about how norms and agency interact. I didn't talk about the middle set, the climbing cases. That's the majority of our cases, the vast majority. Both men and women are inching up their ladders, but norms are just not very supportive of the women. They're moving against the grain. And it makes their lives much more difficult. And the faster we can shift these sticky norms, the better off both men and women are going to be. I can see this in the tipping point cases. So for me, with the systems thinking, so you're learning about the interdependent elements and how local institutions evolve. And how does this happen? Well, it's local people making it happen. Both women and men engaged in processes of social change. So and we have to think about ways to catalyze approaches that enhance the survival chances of existing initiatives for change. I think the tipping points have a lot of lessons for us about the vision that we can work towards, and it's still highly gendered in those cases. I can talk more about them. There is different, one's in Nigeria, it's a poor community, norms are restricted, but they're changing, and women are starting to access markets. And then we have Nepal, where men have been migrating in large numbers, and the women are their commercial farmers and doing the training and now know more than the men about advanced technologies in agriculture. So I guess what I'd be very interested in hearing from you is, do you think that the typology could inform your own targeting strategies, potentially? Or I'm going to be moving into an analysis of more than 80 cases for a paper with my colleagues, a large set of colleagues. And how do we make this more useful, more compelling, more authoritative, more strategic as we go from 27 cases, where we have 43 weak cases where we together did the tipping point analysis. How do I convince you that both men and women and gender really matters in local development processes and environment?
If you want to come up, it's 2 o'clock right now, but we do have the room, so 5 minutes if people sometimes want to take some questions. Yes, Karen.
Thank you very much to all of you for your presentations, which were amazing. I just wanted to ask a quick question to you in particular about methodology. And obviously, I can see this paper is the one we would really like you say to understand the ladders. But I was wondering about the fact that we know that poverty alleviation does not work hand in hand with women's empowerment. Sometimes the ability to conform to a social norm is a luxury that poor women can't afford. I'm thinking in particular, obviously, of seclusion in Asia, where if you're really poor, you're out of the fields working. And what you might want to do as an individual, and therefore if you're focusing on an individual idea of empowerment, that person and empowered, and because she no longer has to go out. But of course, as an outsider, understanding of empowerment, that means she's less likely to have any economic autonomy, and she's much more dependent on her husband and therefore more vulnerable to violence and all of that. Yeah. So I was just wondering, is that coming up? And if so, how do you fix that on these ladders? And where are the analyses of empowerment? Are they outsider or are they very strongly defined by the women in the context?
This is an inductive. We ask them, what makes you feel more
what makes you feel freer? And the question is phrased around relative your strategic life choices. So we're trying to understand your decisions around whether or where you work, whether you'll decisions around leaving a partner, or forming a partnership. So they're major life decisions, but people take this question wherever they want it, and they relate it to their own lives. And I think for women, what we can see is they draw a lot of power from being good mothers. And I think fathers do as well, from being good fathers and providing for their families, because that's the normative frame. And normally, in most of the data, when women gain economic independence, it registers as empowerment. They lose, they're pushed out of the labor market. It's
Also choose to leave them.
if they choose to leave, I think they on steps 3 and 4, we do not necessarily earn income. There are middle-class women that we're doing this exercise with, but mostly, women need to feel empowered across multiple domains, and that gives them, in a way, more resilience. Because men, if they don't feel empowered as providers, they fall on the ladder. And women draw their strength from different sources. It's tricky. This is the hardest data to analyze and to present.
I do think that what you were asking about, yes, it comes out. And it comes out because of the different instruments. So there's focus group instruments, but then there's individual interviews as well. And that's where, yes, we have those very interesting examples of, for example, women from low caste, very poor socioeconomic levels, who report a great sort of growth in their own self-respect and confidence around things, because, hey, I can do things. And this big thing about being able to do things despite, it's not that it was easy, right? Because despite the many things and all the reproaches they met in that process. But yes, it comes out, and that's why I think we can say with authority that
I can complete very quickly. I don't know, I haven't watched this time, but we found what we call the luxury of honor. So compliance with what we would describe harmful norms is a luxury sometimes. You can't do. So what we found in India and Rwanda, we found different happened. In Rwanda, what happened is that because of the economic conditions, then you couldn't comply with the norm of the man is the breadwinner and the woman stays. So we generated this stress. So the women going out of the household. But then the response of the group in that case was to make up with stories of why that was acceptable. So the norm was bending. And say, well, it's acceptable as long as she gets less than her husband. But we define that bending because it's really not like the norms are shifting. It's, okay, they're accommodating the condition, the deep patriarchal structure is dealing with it, and then it's
So
ready
they're not
to.
getting transformation. And it's actually feminine. Not seeing. But I think as an organisation, we'd be interested in being able to track the feminist transformation as well as how women. Yeah, so I want to take it.
Really fascinated. I really in the field is the adoption of new technologies and why women walk away from it. And often it's really simple stuff. But even now in the programs that Miranda, Alice and I are running, you see wherever we move away or ask people just to move a little bit to other parts of the value chain, do a little bit of trading, a little bit of processing, do input, back, even in a targeted program like we run, we still find, unless we really go out to force the issue, that our partners and women then, or through our partners, when staff select not to, do more tech stuff. We need answers on that because, the value chain where we work, smallholder production, is the least profitable part of any value chain. And if we can't get people up, or other parts of it, it's going to be quite difficult to bring about that transformation. Thanks.
In many ways, that's exactly why we're doing this initiative here. In the CG system I refer to, it is exactly about bringing about better livelihoods for people dependent on partly on small scale agriculture. And so what you're mentioning is exactly what we normally see. So we need to understand more of what's going on underneath this to be able to, and that's what we hope the next steps could be, that we can help our system shift a little bit better into being able to address some of those.
Okay, well, I'd really like to thank all of our speakers, and especially for making the effort to come here. And so for the smaller group staying, you might want to think of it, there should be coffee, so grab a coffee and then.
Thanks. Thanks, Miranda.
But we've tried to and apparently you can't get on their own sound program. Oh no, they won't